You ever think about a future that was predicted in terrifying detail, but just never happened? Well, today we're cracking open this really fascinating book from 2005 called The Nostradamus Code, and it laid out this exact year-by-year timeline for a World War III that it said would happen between 2006 and 2012. The book itself kicks off with this great quote from Yogi Berra, and it pretty much sums up what we're doing here. We're not trying to prove if these prophecies are real. Instead, we're just going to explore this incredibly detailed vision of a past future, a world that, according to this one interpretation, could have been. Okay, so here's how we're going to break this all down. We're going to look at the book's wild timeline in 5 parts. First, we'll see how the prophecies were supposedly decoded. Then, we'll meet the main characters in this global drama. After that, the chaotic period before the war. Then, the World War itself. And finally, believe it or not, the amazing new age that was supposed to come after. So, first things first, we have to get our heads around the rules of this whole prophetic world, at least according to the author. How on earth did they pull these super specific predictions from texts that are centuries old? It all starts with the man himself, Nostradamus. The book says his visions were written down in these cryptic 4-line poems called quatrains. And supposedly, he deliberately scrambled them and filled them with symbols so he wouldn't get in trouble with the Inquisition. So they're basically a historical code just waiting to be cracked. Now, to explain how Nostradamus could even do this, the book introduces this really out-there concept it calls simultaneous time. The idea is that from some higher spiritual place, time isn't a straight line. A seer could, in theory, see everything, past, present, and future, all at once, like flipping through a book instead of living it page by page. And here's the most important part, really. This isn't about some unavoidable destiny. The author makes it super clear that these visions are warnings. They're like a snapshot of the path we were on, the course of least resistance, but that through our own free will, we could, and I guess did, manage to steer away from the absolute worst of it. All right, so if this was some epic movie, who would be in the cast? Every huge drama needs its heroes and, of course, its villains. Let's meet the main players who were supposed to take the world stage. So the central conflict is this huge showdown between 2 major figures. On one side, you've got the prophesied Antichrist, who is described as being even worse than Hitler. He uses this twisted philosophy to take over Asia. And his opponent? A guy named Ogmios, this really powerful speaker who leads an underground resistance movement against him. But it doesn't stop there. The supporting cast is just as wild. There's this secret cabal of international bankers supposedly pulling all the strings. A treacherous final pope with a dark family history who actually helps the Antichrist. And even a rich American businessman who's secretly paving the way for tyranny in the US. Now, before the big war was supposed to kick off, the book predicted the world would just fall apart. It was a period of chaos and disaster they called the Time of Troubles. And the book gets incredibly specific with its predictions. It's just one thing after another. A comet in 2006, weather control tech going haywire in 2007, the US and Russia almost going to war in 2008, a rogue nuclear attack in 2009, and, get this, a downed UFO that releases a plague in 2010. It's a whole cascade of disasters. Amidst all this chaos, the book says a terrifying new super weapon gets invented. It's a device that could actually trigger earthquakes along fault lines. They call it the ETW. So all this chaos, this time of troubles, was supposed to be the perfect setup for the Antichrist to make his move and kick off the predicted World War III. And the war they describe is fought with stuff straight out of a nightmare. There's milky rain, a nuclear laser weapon, devices that kill people using radio waves, engineered plagues set loose on cities like New York and London to starve them, and of course that earthquake weapon, the ETW, being used on America's biggest fault lines. The Antichrist's campaign is laid out as this devastating blitz. First, he tricks his way into controlling Asia. Then, he crushes Europe's morale by destroying places like Rome. He invades Britain, attacks New York City, and it's only then that a final North Pole alliance, made up of the Western powers and a newly freed Russia, rises up to stop him. The human cost is just absolute. This quote from the book gives you a grim idea of the famines it predicted, so bad that people would be driven to do the most horrible things imaginable just to survive. But right when it feels like it's the end of everything, the prophecies in the book just completely flip. This apocalyptic war isn't the end. It's actually the violent start of a totally new beginning. So after the Antichrist is finally defeated, the entire tone of the book just shifts. After all that horror and destruction, suddenly there's peace, a lasting peace. And we're not just talking about going back to normal. This is a full-blown golden age. A figure called the Great Genius shows up and unites science and spirituality. People dismantle cities to heal the earth. Materialism just ends. And we supposedly make open contact with extraterrestrials. And this new era wasn't supposed to be some short-lived break. The prediction was that it would last for nearly 1,000 years. So while this incredibly detailed and frankly terrifying future never happened, thank goodness, it does leave us with one last really interesting thought. The book insists these were just warnings, that our free will could change the outcome. If that's true, it raises a pretty big question for us today. In a world that's always full of predictions and warnings, how do we decide which ones matter? And what futures are we creating or avoiding right now?